Hello and welcome to the Flex Podcast, Flex Hoops Podcast. I am Matt St. Jean here with Joe Howie. It's tournament week. Joe, how you doing?
I am anxious. No, I mean I love this time of year. I've been playing with brackets all week. It's a fun time of year, but from the Providence side of things specifically, there is a lot going on in the background. So definitely a little anxious. I'm excited. I think this is a great opportunity for Hopkins to get a little bit of revenge against Kentucky and Calipari. But uh, all in all, I'm excited for the week.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one hell of a week so far. We're not even close to the game yet. So, yeah, we're gonna be talking about it all. You see the title of this episode: rumors and revenge. Those are the two big storylines of the week. We're gonna be talking about them both. Before we get into them, a word from our sponsors. First, we've teamed up with SeatGeek this season to get you the best deals for tickets to your favorite teams. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, and they're here to give you some great deals. Get in on the fun and head over to SeatGeek, download their app, and use code NCAA Hoops Digest for $20 off your first purchase. Go ahead, use that for tickets for Friday. Do it if you're heading down to Greensboro. And as always, this podcast is presented by House Enterprise and in partnership with House of College Hoops. Head over to our site, house-enterprise.com, for more info. I think we're starting with the elephant in the room here, Joe. All
Yeah.
the rumors circulating.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's been growing speculation for probably about 2 weeks now. Well, 365 days if we are only including what Jeff Goodman has to say. But growing speculation about Ed Cooley being linked to the head coach opening at Georgetown, which that opening is official now as of last Friday, I believe, last Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday was Ewing, Friday was Anderson.
Yep.
I believe. Patrick Ewing out at Georgetown. He's been kind of connected, Cooley has, to this position for a while, tentatively. The last week or so, 2 weeks or so, is where things really began to pick up steam in regards to Georgetown reaching out to him, trying to do something. A lot of reports now from people connected to Georgetown that they are offering him, that he is one of, if not the top candidate for the position, that they're willing to offer him a lot of money to go down there. Ed Cooley asked about this after the selection show, and he didn't say no. And I think that alone means there is that combined with some of the other reporting done by very reputable people. Like we all know how we feel about Jeff Goodman. He's good at his job, and he's not making this up. Put everything together. Cooley has been offered. Won't say no about the situation, and the team still has at least one more game to play this season this Friday. So it's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, you have the receipts. You can, screenshot our texts. You can screenshot our Twitter DMs. I was the biggest, I'm not buying into it. I'm not, indulging in the rumors, or any of the conjecture for that matter. But after listening to the Field of 68 last night, there was about a 5 to 7 minute segment in which Goodman, Fanta, and Chris Mack broke this down a little bit more. I will say it's piqued my interest a little bit. And I think following Cooley's comments the other night at the Ruane Fryer Development Center after the bracket reveal, kind of piecing those things together, I would be lying if I said it wasn't circulating in my mind. I do think, there is something important here that the fan base is leaving out, is that, this is Cooley's livelihood. Let's take this out of a basketball setting for a second and put it into corporate America. If you work for company A and you make X $1,000 at company A, and company B sees your resume on LinkedIn or whatever social working profile Indeed that you use, and they come in and they say, hey, we're going to offer you $15,000 more than you're making at company A, you're going to go to your boss and you're going to say, hey, this opportunity landed in my inbox and it's an opportunity for me to provide more money for my family.
Or at least you're going to pick up the phone when they call and say, hey, can we tell you what the job is?
Right. If someone's going to offer you more money to do something that you're good at doing, you're going to listen. And I think a lot of times this gets taken out of context when it's in the realm of sports. I think of this situation, obviously I'm New York based, so I think of the Aaron Judge situation with his free agency. At the end of the day, as much of a game as sports is, there's also a business element to it. And Cooley is just, evaluating options to see what would be the best opportunity for him and his family and his personal income. Now, with all of that said, if Cooley was to leave for Georgetown, would he become the most hated person in Providence and the Big East? Yes, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't take a program from the gutter and build it to the national prominence that he's built Providence to, and then leave for a interleague rival. I think that's in bad taste, and that is why I don't think that he does it. I happen to agree with Jeff Goodman here, where I think that Cooley's going to do the dance. He's going to listen to the offers. He's going to try and use that as leverage over Napolillo and the athletic department to try and get himself a better offer. But I think at the end of the day, at the 11th hour, he is not going to take the job. He's going to stay at Providence.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of factors here, right? I mean, this is a guy with a first-year athletic director, new president at the school. Cooley is the kind of the longest tenured face of not just the basketball team, men's basketball team, not just the athletics program, but the entire school right now. So he knows he has leverage here. And like you said, like he's looking for a raise. If he can make more money, if he can make his job easier, he's going to try to do it. He's a human, and I'm never going to begrudge him that right to try to improve his own situation. He knows he has the leverage, especially after winning a Naismith. And I mean, for all the struggles and the issues we've had with the team this year, 13 conference wins is the second most in program history. 14, which they did last year, is the most. And 12, which they did 2 years before that, is in third place. So 3 of the best 4 Big East records have come in the last 4 seasons. He's done a fantastic job. He knows the school really can't afford to lose him as long as they can afford to keep him. And I think it would be a disservice to himself to not entertain this a little bit. The flip side of it is, I think, and you mentioned the in-conference part of Georgetown. The fact that it's Georgetown and that it's in the Big East is probably why I also lean towards him not taking this offer. The fact that it's Georgetown in the Big East is, I think, the only reason why he's even thinking about it in the first place. John Thompson, as we talked about, is one of his heroes. And how many of us, I mean, we talk about Providence, it's like, is Providence his dream job, or is Georgetown his dream job? Why are we, like, you can have multiple dream jobs. When I was growing up as a kid, there were a lot of different things I wanted to do. At this point in my life, there are still multiple jobs I would consider a dream job. And
absolutely.
And he's gotten to be at Providence for a long time, and now another one of his dream jobs potentially is offering him. And who wouldn't want the opportunity to go to what once was one of the premier programs in all of college basketball, in a hotbed of recruiting, in a place that has a ton of money, and be the hero to revive a program that you cared about and you worshipped growing up? It's a great potential opportunity. Is it better than Providence for Ed Cooley? Nobody knows but Ed Cooley. I don't think he even knows at the moment. I think that's why there are rumors circulating, and nothing has happened yet. But this stuff is complicated. It's incredibly complicated. I think it's a little bit alarming that he does appear to be listening. And yeah, I think that's the biggest news here, is the fact that we have gone from 2 weeks ago, hey, maybe there's something here, to, oh, now there is definitely something, and now we're just playing the waiting game.
I agree. I also think, and this is the fan side of me coming out here, I think the timing of this is so ill-timed. This team is already skidding into the postseason. I mean, we've lost all 3 games that we've played in March. And, now all of these rumors are circulating by the hour more so and more so, as we're projected to play Kentucky at the end of the week. And that game in and of itself, which we're going to get into in a little bit here, is going to be a very emotional game, not only for Bryce Hopkins as a player, but for this Providence program altogether. I think that these rumors are very ill-timed, and we'll call it what it is. It's a distraction, because you can't focus on one thing while another thing is dancing around in the back of your mind. Hopefully, there have been discussions with the players and the team to, tune out these distractions and, stay off of social media. But at the end of the day, everybody's human. These players, these kids, these college kids are human. So I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and speculate on what's going on behind closed doors, because my brother's cousin's best friend's roommate is next door neighbors down the hall from a manager that I did 4 years ago. Like that kind of bullshit is all conjecture. So ignore that. I'll listen to what Goodman and Fanta and who the reputable sources are saying. But
I think generally, like Hilltop Hoops and Casual Hoya are pretty plugged into this stuff too. And at least from the Georgetown side, they know what Georgetown wants, and they're reputable.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sticking to my guns with this one, Matt. You still have the receipts. I don't think he leaves, but the Goodman Fanta dynamic on the field of 68 last night definitely piqued my interest and has brought this to the top of my attention because I was otherwise ignoring it.
Yeah, and I think we've gone from the I don't think he leaves, but we're past the point. Like we can't guarantee he stays. We've passed that threshold now, and I think that makes this notable. That's where the distractions come from.
Yeah.
And we won't have full clarity for being until the earliest, probably Saturday morning at this point. If Providence loses on Friday, I don't think we'd hear anything before then, and likely later. So we shall see what ends up happening with that. That's all we can do at this point. Yeah. Obviously, I think we both hope Ed Cooley remains at Providence, and he's been a great figurehead for the school, the program, the athletics department, and he's great for the conference. So I'd like to see him stay in the conference by staying at Providence and not move down to Georgetown.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this time and time again over the tenure of this season and the offseason is that with Jay Wright out of the picture now, Coach Cooley, Coach McDermott, and I'm going to throw Shaka Smart in here too, now have the opportunity to be these national faces of the Big East. If in some world Cooley leaves for Georgetown, he takes that opportunity and squanders it because he's going to become the new villain. He's going to overtake Dan Hurley as the villain coach of the conference and kind of assume that Steve Wojciechowski position that, of that coach that everybody hates.
Yeah. And it's funny. The only guy who we've seen do this in a recent memory at any place is Chris Beard going from Texas Tech to Texas, which obviously that is
things worked out real well for him.
And I think there were a lot of complications there that had nothing to do with him going from one school to the other. But I think what was notable about that is how very quickly, it didn't take very long to that kind of it got forgotten as a national thing. It's the type of thing that when they play each other, it got brought up, and outside of that, only the two schools still cared about it, and really only the one school there in Texas Tech. So I will say this. I think if Ed Cooley does end up going to Georgetown, I don't think the outside community is going to end up caring for that long a period of time. They'll move on pretty quickly. It'll be Providence fans left holding the bag on that one. And for somebody who has preached family for as long as he has at Providence, I don't think that's a great way to go out.
Yeah, I agree. You can't preach us sweet together family Friars and then jump to an interconference rival. You can't do that.
No. So obviously, we'll see if he does indeed end up doing that. We obviously both think he probably doesn't at this point. Play it by ear. Like you said, we got a basketball game Friday too.
Most important topic of the podcast.
Yeah, and this is the revenge section of the show. The Friars get an 11 seed, the very last 11 seed to not be in a play-in game. So they were a lock by the slimmest of margins to make the eventual field of 64. Yeah. And they're going to be down in Greensboro. They're in the East region against a number 6 seeded Kentucky. We thought the Friars could kind of be in this game as the 6th seed in the East region as recently as 3-4 weeks ago. So shocking turnaround here. But Friars in the East be a matchup likely with Kansas State in the second round. If they get through, you get through both of those. They're right back at Madison Square Garden. So there is still a road to the Garden here. Just everybody drink. But yeah, 7-10
drink.
Yeah, I said the phrase 7:10 Eastern, CBS, Friday night, St. Patrick's Day. What are your early thoughts, Joe?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, when this matchup was announced, my initial thoughts is that's a generous 6th seed for Kentucky, for a Kentucky team that is similar to Providence, limping into the NCAA tournament here, and immediately Bryce Hopkins. And I think if you follow John Fanta on Twitter, you saw his tweet in all caps, and I can just hear him screaming this with his fiance next to him. this is the Bryce Hopkins Bowl, because as everybody knows, there was a great article posted by The Athletic, I think it was at the beginning of February, highlighting how Bryce Hopkins had a miserable time at Kentucky, didn't get a ton of playing time there, was promised the world and was given nothing, came to Providence, worked his ass off against Ed Croswell in the offseason, and has become the face of the Providence basketball program this season. I think too, you look at the Kentucky reaction video that's circulating on Twitter. I think Coach Calipari's face says it all. It's kind of like, all right, we're playing Providence. He realizes Bryce Hopkins is on the team, and then it's like, oh shit. Like his smiles like slowly fades into, I wouldn't say a frown, but just like a neutral position. This is going to be a very tough matchup for both teams. I don't think that Kentucky or Providence is necessarily going to run away with this one. I think it's going to be an extremely physical game with a lot of emotion going into it.
And this is a huge, huge pressure spot for both teams. Obviously, Ed Cooley and all the rumors around him, for all the success he's had, that has been limited when it comes to NCAA tournament success.
Yep.
And with Sweet 16 last year is the furthest he's ever gone.
Mm-hmm.
This is Bryce Hopkins who's going to want revenge on his old team. You guys got guys in there last year for the Friars wanting to do something. Providence hasn't won a tournament game in back-to-back seasons since 73, 74, I believe, is when it was. So looking to do something that this program really hasn't done. I believe that's the only time it's ever happened. You go to the Kentucky side, they don't have a tournament win since pre-COVID. They lost to St. Peter's in the first round last year. People have been calling for John Calipari's job now all season. And the thing that would put the cherry on top of that is getting kicked out in the first round, getting upset by a team who's in disarray. That's what people have been saying. And with a coach who might want to leave and a player who you let leave because you didn't know how to use him.
Yep.
If that happens. So it's both teams, I think, are going to have a chip on their shoulder. Both teams are going to be fired up. It's high pressure. It should be tense. And you never know what's going to happen in an environment. This feels like a rivalry game in a lot of ways, even though when did Providence last play Kentucky, like 2014?
I was going to say it feels like we're playing Villanova or Connecticut again. The emotional anticipation from the fan base going into this one. I mean, when was the last time Providence played Kentucky?
2014. They did a home and neutral with Kentucky in 2013 and 2014. That last meeting in 2014, I believe at the Barclays Center, Kentucky won 58-38. Oh, no, sorry. That was the one at Rupp Arena. It was 58-38. Providence scored 16 points in the second half of that one. Yeah, the one before that in 2013 was at the Barclays Center, and it was close for most of it until Kentucky pulled away at the end. 79-65 was the final. Kentucky's 3-0 against Providence all time. The only other game was back in 76.
Gotcha. All right. So, you know what? Don't hate that.
It's a good time as any for your first win against.
I was gonna say. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot on the line here for both sides of this game. I think one thing that does make me a little bit nervous going into this one is Bryce Hopkins. Is because this is as emotional of a game and of a week as it's been for the program. This is double that for him because he's obviously been very vocal about how he feels about his time at Kentucky. I'm sure, the Kentucky side of things is aware of that. And, for him, I don't want him to come out and start forcing shots to try and prove himself. I'd like to see the game come to him. I know, Matt, this is something you and I talked about off the stream is that, I'd like to see other guys get involved offensively first before we turn the switch to Hopkins. That way, the team can settle into the game. Hopkins isn't necessarily coming out of the gate, like a bat out of hell.
And I think you want to give Hopkins maybe one or two early looks just to get into the game and then let him just play. Get that first shot out of there so the nerves are off. Let him get one through the basket, hopefully, and then you just play basketball.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm in agreement there. But yeah, I think this is a very intriguing matchup, especially in the paint. You have Oscar Shibwe, who's a walking double double, and Ed Croswell, who, for the better part of Big East play, was kind of slept on with respect to national attention. Even though he held his own against the likes of Ryan Kalkbrenner, Adama Sonogo, maybe not Joel Soriano, but certainly Eric Dixon, Jack Nungy, a lot of the big men in the Big East that have been highly acclaimed and have been receiving a lot of media attention. Ed Croswell kind of flew under the radar and held his own and even outperformed them in a lot of the wins that Providence had over these opponents. So I think Croswell rises to the occasion. I don't know if he's, got the build to necessarily shut down Oscar Shibwe entirely. But I think he can hold his own. I think, a lot of people that are discussing this one-on-one matchup aren't giving Croswell enough credit.
Here's a trivia time for you, Joe.
Okay.
Do you know the top 3 players in this year's NCAA tournament in terms of offensive rebounding percentage?
Oscar Shibwe and Ed Croswell are 2 of the 3.
They are 2 and 3. Any idea who number 1 is?
Is it Edie?
Yeah.
Yeah,
which that makes a ton of sense.
That makes a ton of sense. The guy is that man is 7 foot 3? 7 foot 2?
Yeah, he is a whole 3% better than Oscar Shibwe. Oscar Shibwe is number 2 in the country. Zach Edey is number 1, and the gap between the two of them is the gap between Oscar Shibwe and the guy in 12th place on this list. yeah, it's pretty wild. But yeah, Ed Croswell's there to about 3% below what Shibwe is. Croswell's at number 10. So he cracks the top 10 nationally for what he has done this season. And it's one of those, Oscar Shibwe is better than Ed Croswell. I don't think anybody's going to try to argue otherwise. But can Croswell give you 80% of what Shibwe does? Can he limit the damage? Because if he can do that, if he just makes it so Shibwe doesn't entirely dominate the game, Providence is going to have a real shot at winning.
Yeah, not only, I agree, Oscar Shibwe is better than Ed Croswell, but it's not about that. It's about, can Ed Croswell be better than Oscar Shibwe for 30 minutes of that game? I don't think. I think if you're a fan and you're looking at this game with the mindset, okay, Croswell, because he did X, Y, and Z all season, is going to completely and utterly embarrass Shibwe. Totally wrong. If you think Shibwe is going to just bully Croswell down low, I think that's also wrong. I think Croswell needs to play the level of basketball that he played against Eric Dixon, against Ryan Kalkbrenner, even though we lost against them, against Jack Nungy from Xavier. If Croswell can do that and he can hold his own and play better basketball, I think of the UConn game specifically against Adama Sonogo, if that Ed Croswell shows up to this game, Providence has a significant chance of winning.
Exactly, yeah. And that's, I think the other side of this too is I'm just looking at kind of Kentucky's game by game data to see what tracks the most with winning and losing for them. And what I found interesting, offensive rebounding really isn't that huge of a factor. If they absolutely dominate the glass, like 60% of the offensive rebounds, then yes, they win games. And if they're really, really limited, they lose games. But basically everything in like the 50 to 20% range was about the record they've had all season. So yeah, they're going to do well on the glass, I think, no matter what you do. It's not about beating them on the glass. It's about not getting killed there. You're not going to win the game there, but don't lose the game there. And that's going to put emphasis on everybody else, especially the offense and the scoring, to make up whatever that difference ends up being, which is a Kentucky defense that hasn't been fantastic this year. I think Providence's offense will be able to go to work against it.
Yeah, and I said this to you before we started recording, Matt, is that this game to me screams like it's going to be a little bit of a mixture of at Seton Hall, at home over Marquette, and then at home over UConn, where, with respect to the Seton Hall and Marquette games, our offense essentially just outran them. I think Marquette especially, our offense kind of just took it and ran away. It wasn't necessarily a defensive slugfest, but the UConn game in that, you still need to show up and at least punch them defensively. You can't roll over. So I think there's a fine line to be towed here where, you need the offense to fire on all cylinders, but you can't expect this to be a foot race, because if you do, you're going to lose. You need to at least bring some defensive intensity. I think the last 7 minutes of the UConn game at MSG during the Big East tournament. If that defensive team shows up and the offensive team that shows up that beat Marquette early on in December, I think Providence will win it easily. But who knows what Providence team is going to show up.
Yeah, and that's where I think one thing that I've noticed since Thursday afternoon, talked to Ed in the post game, he was as excited as I have ever seen him after a loss. And I think a lot of that had to do with figuring things out in the last 12 minutes. We didn't even talk about that game on here, but that was the first 28 minutes were awful. And then
Terrible.
Things clicked. Like that's for 28 minutes, UConn was the best team in the nation. And for 12 minutes, Providence made UConn look like the team from January. And Providence played like the team it was back in January.
Yep.
If you get
exactly
that 12 minutes over a full game, if you can get that effort, that energy, I think the thing that stood out with that too is they just hit shots. When the guys on the outside hit shots for Providence, it opens up room on the inside for Bryce Hopkins to work, and then he gets the one-on-one matchups where he can dominate and he doesn't have to play through contact every single time he touches the ball, and it makes everything flow. That's why this offense is, I think, 16th in the nation on KenPom. It's a really good offense. You just need the guys to hit the shots to make it run.
I always say this, offense and defense feed into one another. And when you're playing bad defense, you're going to get frustrated on offense. And when you're frustrated on offense and the shots aren't falling, you're a little bit slower to get back on defense because you're discouraged. I think when you look at that 12-minute stretch at Madison Square Garden last Thursday, the two guys that, jump off the paper at me or jump off the court, whatever you want to say, are Noah Locke and Corey Floyd. I mean, those two guys made all the difference. Locke started hitting his outside shots. Corey Floyd had a couple of steals, a couple of big buckets down the stretch there. Those are the two guys to me that were like, okay, this is what's clicking right now. And if that means you're going to sacrifice ball handling guards like Breed, Bynum, and Jaden Pierre on the bench for those two in the backcourt, so be it. I think we even saw Devin Carter bringing the ball up and playing the one for a couple of minutes there late down the stretch. So if that's what it takes to be competitive in these games, then that's fine by me. I mean, you need guys that are going to be spark plugs from here on out. It's not about egos. It's not about playing time. It's about winning basketball games. And that's the most important thing down the stretch here. If that means your freshman and your fifth-year transfer from Louisville and Florida and wherever the hell Noah Locke else came from, if that means those guys are getting your minutes and you're having your small forward bring the ball up, fine.
Yeah, and I think Noah Locke can really be the X factor in this game.
Yeah.
Because his veteran experience will help you out here, but also because it's Oscar Tshiebwe on the other side. He's not a guy who's going to come all the way out on defense.
Right.
And that means that you can set some high screens and get guys going down towards the basket. Noah Locke will have opportunities for three-pointers and he'll have opportunities for those elbow jumpers where I think he's actually done very well with those elbow jumpers this year. That mid-range game has been there for him.
He likes those a lot.
Yeah, and if he can start getting some of those going, that is where the rest of the offense comes to life. You don't need anything crazy dynamic from him, but if he can just get you a couple of shots, I think if you can, we're probably going to ask for 3 3-pointers from Noah Locke, 2 or 3 3-pointers, and 2 or 3 mid-range shots. You do that, and you get yourself a nice 15 to 20-point performance in this one. That, with the rest of what this team does, should work. You just have to not turn the ball over. I mean, it's a Kentucky defense. It doesn't really force turnovers. So do that. Find some ways to be active on the glass. I do note Oscar Tshiebwe is fantastic at defensive rebounding as well. That's not an area where you see any of the Providence players on the top leaderboard there.
Yeah.
But so you're going to have to be active on the glass at both ends. You're going to have to outwork them on the glass, minimize the difference there, and hit your shots on offense. And this will at least be a close game if you meet all of those criteria.
Yeah, I agree. I think something that doesn't necessarily jump off the stat sheet either, but has been something that has been a thorn in our side for the month of March. You cannot sleepwalk out of the gates in this game.
No.
You cannot come out and fall behind by double figures. You can't do it. You overcame the deficit against Xavier. You almost did it against UConn, and you really didn't even try against Seton Hall. If you do that against Kentucky, they're going to run you out of the state of North Carolina. Forget the gym. They're going to run you out of the state and back up to the Northeast. This team needs to come out ready to play. No, missing three-pointers. Take good shots. Let the offense come to you and lock in defensively. It's not that difficult.
And that's Providence has lost 3 games in a row now, and in all 3 of them, they got down by 20+ points
Yeah.
early. That is what's unacceptable. Like, it's just, you're not going to beat you're not beating SEMO that way, who I
No.
believe is playing right now as we do this. I think that's the 16s game that's going on right now, SEMO and FDU.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're not beating anybody if you're opening the gate and coming out and just trotting out of it. No, you got to come out full speed. You got to come out locked in. You have to play well. And honestly, I will say against UConn, I thought the first 4 minutes of that game, the team played well, and then they lost it. And I think that's how long have we talked about it this season? They still don't have a solid rotation of guys, and I think that's because the players themselves are so inconsistent. There isn't really a button to push that's like, okay, we can go to this right now.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of my bigger frustrations with that game is it's like you go down in these holes and you try and throw shit at the wall to see what sticks. I feel like you got to keep things tight, especially now. This is you're playing for your life here. You lose this game and the 2022-2023 campaign is over. So you really don't have time to tinker with, okay, does Rafael Castro play better defense than Bryce Hopkins right now? You don't have time for that. Just it's a fact of the matter. And quite honestly, in the backcourt too, if X player's making shots and X player isn't defending, he's got to sit the bench. Egos have to take a back seat here with respect to postseason play, and that could work against me too right now. Bryce Hopkins could have a bad game and could sit the bench. Like, just because it's his revenge game doesn't mean he deserves those minutes. Now, do I think that he's going to have a bad game?
No, you play the best 5. I mean, that's what this is all about. And realistically, you're going to have to play the best 6 or 7 in this one. You're going to need a couple groups that you can throw out there because Kentucky's deep and Kentucky's talented and they got a lot of guys. They just K-Mac put out this tweet earlier. They're 1-7 this year against top 30 Ken Palm offenses. So if Providence's offense locks in and gets going, this is not a Kentucky offense that has been able to keep up with that for most of the season.
Yeah.
Even with Providence's defense having issues, you just give a semblance of a care on defense, especially when Kentucky misses shots. And as long as the offense is going, you're going to be all right. The other part of this, too, is if you get misses, you get to play in transition. Yeah. We've talked about it for so long now because it's just simple and it's true and it works. Bryce Hopkins is a freak athlete and is much better in the open floor than in the half court. Same for Devin Carter. Devin Carter all alone with the ball is a guaranteed free 2 points. He doesn't miss those. He's just going to dunk it.
I think back to that 6-game win streak or whatever, however many games it was at the start of conference play. Hopkins and Carter in transition were absolutely fantastic. And I think the Marquette game specifically, you had Hopkins coming down the court like a steam train, and you had Tyler Kolek, who was guarding him, the eventual Big East Player of the Year, immediately whistle gets blown, he goes to the stripe. If you get a Hopkins full head of steam, looking to steamroll some of his former teammates, and they don't get their feet set or they leave that hand in there too long while trying to contest a shot, Hopkins can get to the line very easily. So I think you're totally right, Matt, with respect to transition play. On the Kevin McNamara front, I actually, in the wee hours of the night when I was on my Twitter binge until 2:00 in the morning, I actually listened to a replay of the Kevin Mack Sports Hour. And he said that stat that you just shared about Kentucky being 1-7 against top 30 Ken Palm opponents. He also said this is not he said this is not your father's Kentucky where they have a nice array of first round NBA draft picks. This is a Kentucky that looks much different this year. I mean, granted, Shibwe is really good. Toppin is really good. We saw him, what was that, at URI a couple seasons ago. They still have good players.
He was back there in 2020. He was there a senior year.
Yeah. They still have some really good players. Calipari is a really good coach. But this is not the same Kentucky that won, 8 national championships. This is not the Kentucky that is ranked first in the nation. Kentucky's backcourt is a little bit young, a little bit beat up right now. And I think, our backcourt is just blatantly older and better, is in my personal opinion. And I haven't watched a lot of Kentucky basketball, but this is what everything is pointing to right now.
Yeah. Well, and you look at some of the names to watch here in their backcourt. Cason Wallace, who's a freshman, he's going to go to the NBA next year. He's really the only bona fide NBA guy on this roster, I think, right now. At least first round, like lottery pick type guy next year.
Right.
He's their starting point guard, and he's fine. He passes the ball pretty well. He can play some pretty good defense. He's not a great 3-point shooter. He's below 35%. He's streaky. He's not. He's an average shooter. He's nothing more than that. Antonio Reeves in the shooting guard position for them, who's a transfer up from Illinois State. He's in his 4th year. He's a senior. These are not the guys you typically see when you're talking about a Kentucky team.
Right.
He's a good 3-point shooter. He hits it over 40% from deep. So that's a guy you got to cover. After that, Chris Livingston's a freshman for them. He doesn't really do a whole lot. He's 6'6". He can help you out on the defensive end, but he's not. None of these offensive numbers pop whatsoever for him. He doesn't really knock down shots from deep. He doesn't take a lot of shots from deep. Jacob Toppin is a good player for them, but again, there's nothing that super jumps out other than that he's a good rebounder. He's not a fantastic shooter or finisher. And then you got Oscar Tshiebwe, who's obviously a National Player of the Year type guy and who can take over a game. And we'll see if Severe Wheeler plays in this one. He's a small guard for them who can do some stuff and can make things work for them. But it's not. You're absolutely correct by saying this is not your father's Kentucky team. This isn't the Kentucky team we watched in middle school growing up.
No,
this is not. It's an offense that's effective because Oscar Tshiebwe is really, really, really good, and they get offensive rebounds and second chances. Just be competitive on the glass, and this offense is not that good.
Right. And this isn't me trying to take anything away from this Kentucky team or program, because obviously Kentucky is a very historically well-known college basketball program. But I think when you look at, the landscape of college basketball fandom and March Madness as a whole, a lot of people are immediately writing Providence off here because it's Kentucky, the blue blood, the multiple national championships, versus Providence, the small Northeast school out of the Big East that, got the doors beat off in the Big East tournament. And, I think a lot of people are just looking at the overall program historic profiles in this one and aren't really digging into the details. Like this, I personally think the 6th seed is very generous for Kentucky. I think it's a very generous seed given Kentucky.
I saw this as a 7-10 matchup in brackets about a week ago. So this is a really good draw for the Friars. It's an inconsistent Kentucky team, from a team that has lost 2 of its last 3, by the way, both to Vanderbilt.
Who's in the NIT.
Yeah, and Vanderbilt's playing good ball right now, but they're not like Providence can play that level of ball. Providence has played better ball this season as recently as a month and a half ago.
Right.
And it's just like you look through this resume for Kentucky, they lost on a neutral site to Michigan State. They lost at Gonzaga. These are obviously acceptable losses, but they did happen. They lost to UCLA on a neutral court. They did beat Michigan on a neutral court in a game that was very close. I believe that game was in England back in November. They did a special over there. They have a loss to Missouri. They have a loss to South Carolina. That's the Georgetown of the SEC right now in terms of how good they are.
Yeah,
that's a bad loss. That's a really bad loss for Kentucky. That's a quad 4 loss. That was at home too. They lost to Kansas at home. They lost to Arkansas. They lost to Georgia, and then twice to Vanderbilt. Georgia is like, I don't know, the Butler of the SEC right now with how good they are. If you had a team from the Big East that lost to both of those teams, we're not talking this way about them. The only reason Kentucky is being talked about this way mostly is because of
the brand.
There's the brand. And they have some good wins in there too. I listed the losses, not the wins. It's not like they haven't beaten anybody.
Right.
But they're up and down. You don't know which team you're going to get. Kentucky could blow the doors off Providence. Providence could go in there if Kentucky has a bad night and blow the doors off the Wildcats.
Yeah.
Either can happen.
I mean, really, the character foil here of Kentucky is Providence. Like they both have some, not so great losses on their resume. They both have some good wins. This is a more even of a matchup than the seeding suggests, and I think that's what's important to note here. And if there
it's an even matchup if we get the Providence team that we saw back in January or February,
Exactly.
December.
If the Providence team that was ranked in the top 25 for whatever 6 or 7 straight weeks, with Bryce Hopkins in the conversation for Big East Player of the Year, in the running for at least a share of the Big East regular season title, if that Providence shows up to Greensboro, North Carolina on Friday to play Kentucky, I think you're going to get a very, very close game. Like,
Exactly.
close enough where the spread of 4 isn't covered.
Yeah. And if it's a close game, then it's just going to come down to who makes the shots. And you know what? If Kentucky makes them, Kentucky makes them, and that'll happen sometimes. But
Yeah.
I think this can be absolutely a competitive game. And the Friars have gotten a little bit unlucky at points of the season, it's felt, and part of that has been absolutely self-inflicted.
Right.
But
Shoot
it's
yourself
just
in the foot.
Yeah, but there might be a little regression to the mean due here. Like, this team has played bad basketball, I think, because they haven't been locked in. And Ed Cooley seems as happy as he's ever been. All the press stuff this week talked about how excited he is. He said after the UConn game, this is a team that can go to the Final Four.
He
What
did
do you
say
say? Don't
that.
be surprised if we go to the Final Four.
Mm-hmm.
Either he's bluffing hardcore and he's trying to get his team up and trying to get them motivated, which is possible if he's trying to talk them up and make them feel better, I guess, and try to get some higher level play out of them. Or he's finally seen something out of them and he's seen them come together and they've had meetings and things have gone well and things have been better in practices. And if that's the case, that if you go in Bart Torvik, which is Ken Palm but free, you can sort dates on there. And from the start of December, I think, through the UConn win or the St. John's win in early January, Providence was like a top 15 team in the country.
Yeah.
If you get that team, the only way they lose is if Kentucky goes and does something crazy or Oscar Tshiebwe dominates the game. And if that happens, that happens. You put yourself in this spot by losing the games to play a team as good as Kentucky in the first round.
Yeah. I just want to make a comment on the Cooley. As good of a motivator as Cooley is for these young men, he's also a great coach and a great mentor. And I think if you're going to read between the lines with some of this stuff here, you look at Providence's reaction when they heard their name called during the selection show. Cooley immediately looks at Bryce Hopkins. Hopkins walks around. Cooley doesn't keep his gaze off of Hopkins. They come back, they embrace. So it's, Cooley knows damn well what's at stake here for his star player and for his program. And if we're going to, flip the pages back a little bit here to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, a win over Kentucky and Calipari only helps this man with whatever negotiations he's working on in the background.
Exactly. So obviously we'll see how it goes. I think it was also notable, I think there have been the body language experts have been out and about the last couple of weeks, and I'm not going to speculate. I would guess some of that is fair. I don't know to which point. That did not look like a team on Selection Sunday that didn't want to be together. That looked like a bunch of guys that do want to play and are excited. And you know what? Maybe waiting until the very last 11 seed to be picked and having some nervousness on Selection Sunday about whether or not they're making it breathes a little more life into you. Cooley was clearly, he said this is a second chance. So,
you know what? Sometimes you need a little wake-up call to, get you going on the right track. Hopefully the right track for us is a win on Friday. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. And let's not forget, when this team went into the NCAA tournament last year, it had just gotten blown out by Creighton on Friday of the Big East tournament and had just lost to Villanova just before that, and had lost to Villanova again, I think, right before that, no, it was a couple weeks before that. But I had lost 2 out of 3, including a blowout loss on a neutral site to a 9 seed or an 8 seed or whatever Creighton was. That was not a Providence team that was trending in the right direction into the tournament. It was a team that got into the Sweet 16. I don't care about momentum. I don't care that this team has lost 3 in a row. This team is Jekyll and Hyde. There are 2 Providence teams this year. I also don't care about the home road splits, because we saw this team almost lose to Ryder in the first game of the season at home. I don't think it's home road. I think it's that this team was locked in for 6 weeks and has been hit or miss for the rest of the season. It's just that those 6 weeks happen to coincide with facing a couple good teams at home. And it's also always easier to win at home. But how are you going to watch the last 12 minutes of that UConn game and tell me this team has an ability playing on a neutral site?
You can't. There is some truth to playing at home versus playing away from home. I think a lot of people like to beat that argument to death because it works in the favor of bashing Providence. Is my take on that. There is truth to it. Providence did not play well away from home this season. That's an objective fact. You can't argue that. I think taking that and dissecting it and using it as an analysis of the team and X, Y, and Z, I think that is just, that's banter and that's conjecture that you don't really need. So, like you said, Matt, Providence played the best basketball of the last month and a half during those final 7 minutes against UConn at Madison Square Garden. So, you know what? If that team shows up against Kentucky on Friday, I'd be very confident in the Friars.
Yeah, and let's not forget here some of the away from home performances. Like there's the Miami, St. Louis, and TCU ones, which get brought up. Right in between those were 2 home games against teams outside of the top 300 in KenPom that were kind of close for most of them. 14-point wins in each of them at home. Not the greatest performances, and they got the win at Seton Hall. They got a win at Villanova. Yeah. They went to Xavier and send that game to overtime. Either team could have won that one. They didn't have a letdown. The road letdown against St. John's happened kind of in that right as we turned to February and things started to go south. The loss at UConn, they showed up for, and UConn just pulled away. And they lost the last 2 regular season games at home. I think this team just sometimes doesn't show up for games, and it happened to also happen on the road against good teams.
Right. So there's no pattern here. There's no real common theme other than if the team shows up, chances are they'll win. If the team doesn't show up, regardless of the building that they're playing in, chances are they're going to lose or make it very difficult for themselves to win.
Exactly. Yep. That's the key thing right there. And I think we'll know in the first 5 to 10 minutes of this game on Friday night if Providence is going to have a shot or not.
I agree. I will say this. Maybe I won't say it. I'm not going to say it.
Okay.
I changed my mind. I don't want to say it.
No jinxes. No. But yeah, Friday night on CBS, you get the primetime treatment for this one. I would assume if Providence gets through to Sunday, they probably also get that treatment for a Sunday game. I assume the crew would be staying. So could be a nice little national treatment for the Friars and a really good chance to prove yourself on a national stage. Yep. This is it. It's do or die time. It's 0-0. You wipe the records clean. Nothing that happened before this matters. So you go out and you do what you can. And I think I don't mind if this team loses at this point. And this is kind of what I said about the Big East tournament. I mind whether or not they show up and play hard.
Exactly. If you put the effort in like you did at Xavier, like you did at, I guess, against UConn in the final 7 minutes. If the team makes an effort and, looks like they want to be there and they're competing at the top level that they can, and at the end of the day, the ball just doesn't roll their way and they lose, that you can stomach. If they get curb stomped, that's when I'm upset because that's just a lack of effort.
Exactly. I think that's about all we have to say on this one.
Yeah. Enjoy your Guinnesses. Throw on your Friar lucky shirts and your scally caps because this one's on St. Patrick's Day for the 2nd year in a row.
Gotta love it. Playing on St. Patrick's Day is fun. I took Friday off in advance anyway because I was like, you know what, I want to be able to enjoy my basketball on Friday, and all 5 Big East teams playing. So I think,
and that was a very wise choice of PTO, Matthew.
It was perfectly designed. So got 4 in the early slot there. I'll get to wake up and just enjoy the first 4 games, and then figure out what I'm doing for the late games.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's going to do it for us on this one. That is Joe Howie. I am Matt St. Jean. We'll probably see you at some point next week, or depending on what happens here, maybe this weekend. If there's good and or awful news, we may have to do an emergency podcast. So we shall see what happens. But for Joe, I'm Matt St. Jean. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.